Welcome, everybody. I think we're on the adventure story of the 21st century. I think in the hundreds of years gone by, explorers were trying to find new Earth, new parts of the planet. They were trying to find new species and have those species named after them. But the adventure story that we're on here in the 21st century is, I think, one of the biggest that we're facing of our time, and that is how we save the planet. And so today we're going to just learn a little bit more about the rise of climate tech in the African continent. And I like what Lorraine said about sustainability, that it's not about the sustainable rise, it's actually regenerative rise of climate tech on the continent. My name is Sarah Scott. I am the moderator today. I am born and bred in South Africa, but I live at the foothills of Kilimanjaro. I have an ecosystem restoration organization called the Kilimanjaro Project. We are connecting smallholder farmers to the global carbon markets through a carbon program called TIST. We also are looking at riparian zone restoration, paying farmers to grow trees to protect these water systems, as well as saving an endangered tree species. I believe in partnerships. I believe that we need partnerships that will enable scale and acceleration. And this is really one of the biggest challenges that I think we're facing in climate tech, is how do we take these amazing technological solutions and how do we scale them and accelerate them? So I'm joined by the panelists today. There's only 4 of us, so I think we're going to probably have more of a fireside discussion. We've had some great conversations leading up to this. So I think we'll go each one, introduce yourself, what you do, what area you're playing in, and then I'd like you to start by just giving a story of hope. What is your hope for the continent around climate tech? Karen, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. You can hear me okay? My name is Karen Serem Waithaka, and I'm the investment principal for Africa for Catalyst Fund. I am based here in Johannesburg, but I'm originally from Kenya. So what we do is we are climate tech investors, and we invest in very early stage, so pre-seed companies in Africa that are improving the resilience of those that are hardest hit by climate change. We know that as much as in Africa we don't contribute as much to climate, we are the hardest hit when it comes to the change. And so what we do is invest in entrepreneurs that are using technology to solve for instances like, for example, insurance, offering insurance to the hardest hit climate vulnerable communities, looking at waste management, looking at energy, looking at ag tech. There's a variety of sectors we look at: essential services, livelihoods, fintech, but specifically for those that are in the climate tech space. That's us in a nutshell.
And your hope?
My hope? Oh,
No,
I have so many hopes. I think the main one is for climate tech to not be a niche sector, that many people, not just the investors, not the government, so investors, government, individuals, can understand that climate change is not something that happens out there. It's something that is currently happening to us. It's affecting us in a very big way. And to make this to be a natural, we'll have investors at the early stage like us. We'll have bigger investors who can take over the companies that we have accelerated through our program as well. We'll have governments coming in and actually implementing all the things they discuss at all the COPs and all the conferences that they go to, and not just develop policies that end up gathering dust in a corner somewhere. So I want climate tech to be mainstream and not a niche. That's my hope for climate tech in Africa.
Fantastic, thank you. Over to you, Callum.
Cool. Yeah, my name. Is this fine?
Yeah.
You can hear me fine, eh? Okay. My name is Callum Oberholzer. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for having me here. I'm the founder of Black Box Studios, which is a venture studio, and we're from Durban. We're focused on stewarding resources to impact people and the planet to create new access. And that's something that we really believe that digital tech and tech in general needs to do in order to have a healthy relationship with communities. And so, my hope, huh?
Yeah.
I'd say my hope is very simple. When it comes to stewarding resources, I want in my generation to basically have the sentiment that we leave this lifetime having regenerated the little bit of area around us better than it was before. So I think like your patch, whatever's local, whatever's close to you, to leave that better, and then we want to build the tools to help people do that. That's me.
That hope is hard to beat, but so my name is Daniel Naidu. Good afternoon, everyone. Basically, my experience spanned from ESCOM to Sasol and eventually TIA, which currently I'm head of Energy and the Natural Resources Business Unit. So my thematic areas include mining, water, wastewater, circular economy, waste. And in terms of energy, we cover everything in terms of energy storage to hydrogen. So that covers my thematic areas. In terms of my hope, so I think we really need to look at technologies that are going to reduce emissions and maybe have mitigating technologies to reduce carbon with the climate in terms of the whole economy for carbon, to reduce carbon, because it's really impacting the world. And you can see for the future, are we going to leave a future for our kids and for our grandkids? Or are they going to have temperatures soaring up to 50 degrees? Do we really think about them? So for my company, we really like to support technologies that actually help in terms of reducing carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. So my next question is for Callum. With Africa's population, coming on 1.5 billion and making up 20% of the population of the world, there's obviously here with that a huge possibility and opportunities, but also barriers. As a project developer, as someone who's designing programs and technology, what do you feel some of your greatest barriers are, and what are your greatest opportunities?
I think barriers, I think resource stewardship in general is a big problem on the continent, but also just access to the right resources. And so when we speak about access, I'm not one who gets incredibly hyped up about your metaverses and your different sort of technologies that are being forged in the West at the moment. I love the idea of bicycles. I think bicycles are a phenomenal invention that the tech world and the digital tech world can actually learn a lot from. So when you think about the access or the learning curve of a bicycle, it's phenomenal. You've got the most sustainable way of generating energy that's being made use of there, your metabolism. And you've got maybe a couple of hours of learning how to use that thing. And then the benefits are massive. You can traverse incredible distances that you couldn't when you were walking. And so I think part of the solution for me is designing tech that's like the bicycle. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be low cost, it needs to have a low barrier to entry, low learning curve. And I think we've done some of those at Black Box. So I think that's kind of my hope. The opportunity that exists is to build tech like that. But I think the barriers, it would be access at the moment in the tech space.
And when you say access, is that access to networks? Because I often say that in this space we have a lack of access to global and Pan-African networks that unlock the access to the financial resources needed to scale and accelerate. So when you talk about access, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think I come from Durbs, and I'd say our tech ecosystem is quite limited at the moment. We have a couple of big key players that have done amazing things, your Derivcos, and maybe it's even Mr. Price, some of the well-known companies there, but there's very much a limited ecosystem, and I think tech ecosystems create access to all of those particular things. It's the networking, it's bringing people together, it's the sharing of information, it's essentially also creates hope as well. So I think all of it, access to all of the above, And I think the creation of ecosystems is a good solution for that access problem.
Great. So, Karen, you're in the accelerator space and in the investment space. Where do you see some of these barriers and opportunities on the continent, and what types of projects are you looking at investing in?
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, we come in quite early, so we're able to identify these companies at the point where they've set up a team, they have a product, they have just started figuring out product market fit. So I find that in terms of access, there are very limited investors who come in at that very early stage. So in terms of access to finance, a lot of these companies may not necessarily have that many options at that very early stage, other than friends and family and what they call fools, but not really fools. So I think having more early stage investors would improve that access. I think another barrier, a barrier would be heavily, I think, government. So having the right sort of policies in place, legislations in place that help foster that environment that entrepreneurs are able to come in and affordably start businesses, affordably access the inputs they need. For example, if you're doing something in e-mobility, in some regions, for example, where I'm from, the tax that you get charged to bring in the inputs for you to manufacture either it's a e-bike or e-motorbike or whatever it is very punitive. So it's very difficult for you to start a business unless you have very heavy backing from in terms of a funding perspective. And infrastructure as well. So if you're doing e-mobility but you don't have any power, how does that work? So I think government would come in very heavily. I think they are a barrier to development in terms of creating policies, even for solar, making solar more affordable, other alternative renewable energy. But in terms of opportunities, the benefit of being in a continent where we're still very early in our development stage, the gaps are many. There's applications in agriculture where you have precision farming, you have applications in insurance where you can have sort of area index-based insurance products. You have applications in cold chain where you can provide solutions for farmers to store their produce. In interesting ways of sort of adjusting or adopting your solution to the low income market. So you offer pay-go solutions. So people are able to pay maybe on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, how they can afford, so solutions that do that. That's what we look for as well. And I think that combines the challenges in terms of the gaps we have, but using those challenges as opportunities for fostering growth as well.
Tia, I know you work as an extension of a government office. What is your response to that in terms of government setting the stage and the policies and regulations that can help accelerate and scale tech?
So I just want to add in terms of opportunities. There's a story that I always remember. So there was a British company that sent a shoe salesman to Africa, and he said, please, so in his report back, he said to them, guys, please don't send any shoes. They take the shoes back because nobody wears shoes here. So 2 months later, they said, let's send another guy because that guy, maybe he's got a better attitude. So this guy came to Africa and he said, please, send 10 ships of shoes because nobody wears shoes here. So it depends how you see the opportunity. So I think in terms of access and opportunity, there is opportunity for climate tech innovators in South Africa because we do have a huge problem. In fact, in Sasol and Secunda, we've got the biggest point of CO2 emission in the world. So we've got emissions, even we don't produce most of the emissions compared to the rest of the world, but we are impacting, that's impacting our coastlines, that's impacting our agriculture, that's impacting our water, that's impacting. So there is opportunities. I think in terms of government, we work closely with the Presidential Climate Commission. In fact, we're part of the working group, and they're looking at the just energy transition to see how can we get new types of energy in, but also be just to the employees and to society to see they're not impacted. Because obviously mining will be impacted and the employees will be impacted. So that transition is already planned to repurpose power stations. So so there's a whole spectrum of clean tech. You look at clean energy, but you look at basically in terms of carbon capture, in terms of carbon analytics, you look at energy storage, you look at e-mobility. So we look at, so the opportunity is endless for climate tech. And I think from a funding agency, if your concept is viable, if it proves to be sustainable, viable, we will support it. So I think from the government side, they've changed policy, the open policy, and there is funding available. But we just don't fund anything. We actually do a complete due diligence. We look at how feasible it is, how viable it is, and how sustainable it is. Because we don't support companies that don't show sustainability. You've got to be sustainable in the next 10 years. And we look always at the bottom line, and the lady mentioned that you shouldn't look at profits, but we always look at profits because you need profits to survive. I mean, you can have all the good intentions and all the social intentions, but the smaller guys, you still need to be profitable over a period of time.
I think this is something that we were talking about earlier, this like incremental growth. I was at New York Climate Week last year, and we had an investor basically say that they had 500 million to invest in our carbon project. But we said, well, in order to answer the scrutinous questions that would come, we would need $2 million to go and do that kind of feasibility phase. And they're like, but we don't have $2 million. We have 500 million and we can't access the 2 million. So I think that like this kind of obsession with this accelerated growth really fast, whereas actually what is needed is these small incremental steps towards sustainability, or rather towards regeneration, is that rather go small little steps so that if you find a flaw in your methodology or what you're doing, you're able to pivot without crumbling the whole ecosystem that you've built, or the tech that you've built. So I know you were saying something about this earlier, Karen, about that's what you're looking at, these slow incremental growth, and then it's almost like when you reach that, then you get investment, then you reach the next step, and then investment. Maybe you can comment on that.
I think our discussion was on unicorns and what I think about unicorns. And maybe I'm the only VC investor who does not necessarily feel like I need to have a unicorn in my portfolio. I would rather have, I was mentioning just a number. So for example, if I have 10 investments, have 10 steadily growing companies that are doing well, and I can see that they've become sustainable, they're making an impact in the various sectors that they're in, as opposed to having one unicorn and like 9 that are sort of just trudging along and not really making an impact. Because I feel that as we grow these businesses, especially given that some of the technologies and impact that they're doing is quite new. For example, we have a company in our portfolio that does carbon sequestering. I'm still learning how to pronounce that word. And just trying to understand how they're monetizing that solution. If you try and grow that business too fast, there's so many loopholes or gaps or mistakes that you can make along the way that eventually what happens, it affects other potential companies that have come in as well, other investors who may have decided to take the risk of investing in such a business, because when one company fails, all investors are like, ooh, maybe that's not the sector that we should be going into. So I think slow, not necessarily slow, but steady growth, as opposed to hyper-inflated, sort of unrealistic growth, I think is the way for me anyway, personally.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and I just think like having bootstrapped a company and a venture, like the beauty of bootstrapping and organic growth is like you can learn the same lesson with 1,000 Rand and 10,000 Rand. And like to try and learn as many of those lessons with the smaller numbers, because the principles are the same. And I know there are different pressures and whatnot, but I think I completely agree with you. We need, I don't know what they are. They're not unicorns. Maybe they're horses. But like we need a lot of those, or bicycles.
Hybrid horses.
Yeah.
Hybrid horses. So we were talking about tech as being an enabler for solving some of these big climate issues, and I know that this is something very close to your heart, Callum. So where do you see, and maybe you can tell us actually a little bit about the app that you designed during the flood, because I think that's very pertinent to finding a very quick solution very quickly, and really showing what then tech can enable.
Yeah, it was quite wild. I mean, so obviously the floods in Durban were very traumatic. I don't know if anyone here was affected by them, but me and my team were personally affected by those floods. And we were, it was a Monday, and I remember sort of the flood started, I think it was Monday evening, and then on Tuesday we're just like, there was cars being washed and whatnot. So we said, okay, well guys, we can build interactive maps really quickly. Let's build something where we can plot all the needs, where individuals can plot their needs during this crisis, and then where others who have resources can plot their resources. And so we just have this big map where there's needs and resources. And if you have a need, you can contact someone who's made themselves available with a resource, and vice versa. And so we're like, cool, let's do this. We were POPI compliant, but we basically said people need a big Mayday button right now. It's raining outside, crazy things are happening. We're going to build them a Mayday button. And so we stopped all our paid work and we programmed for 36 hours straight. We developed a prototype and we sent it to some WhatsApp groups with different non-profits and organizations. They did some tests. 6 hours later, we put it on Twitter. And the second day, we got up to 4,000 users a day. We had 27,000 users in 12 days using it to distribute resources across the municipality. And I think like the learnings there was you don't need to build something amazing to provide incredible value in a short period of time. And also to just test things in the wild, like put it out there, see what people are saying, and iterate really fast. And I think like, yeah, it was traumatic in some senses because we saw all the needs of people coming, from thousands of people, but we also saw like how much agency there is from the citizenry to participate in the crisis and to actually collaborate, and that was quite significant for us. Did I answer your question properly?
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
Me? Oh, okay. So I think that was an impressive. So what that ties into is need. So in TIA, previous years we actually funded a lot of technologies, and we actually had account close to a couple of billion in funding. But then we realized in the end, many of these inventors, they go and they get these technologies, they get the prototypes, they demonstrate it, and then it sits on a shelf. You get your IP. So what we decided in terms of a strategy is that we need to commercialize products. So if you come to us, you should actually have some type of commercial partner or some partnership with somebody who will be interested in this technology. If it demonstrates itself, then that person will be interested in procuring that technology. So there was a need. Obviously, we just cannot support any technology. It has to be a need. So now you got to tie in with a partnership. So when you come to us, we ask you guys, did you speak to industry? Have you got a partnership? Is somebody interested in this technology? If nobody's interested in this technology and there's no need, we can't support you. So we always encourage those who want to apply for funding, but they've got to have some type of industry partnership or social partnership.
I agree. I've had an experience last year, again, when we were in New York. We were chatting with these guys in the Silicon Valley that had just had a startup. They weren't in the climate space. They were designing an app that they really didn't do the market research for us users on the ground that would need to use the app, whether we would even need it. Then they also had, so they had tech, they did project design, and then carbon methodology creation. And so, but we didn't need the app. Well, anyway, within 2 years, these guys have crashed and burned. And they were the blue-eyed investor child in New York. Everyone was talking about them. Everyone was just like, oh. But it almost like it became an echo chamber. It's like we're creating technology, climate solutions, and everyone's jumping on board that. But actually, are they really solving for the people on the ground that need what they have to offer? So I think that like needs assessment is really important.
Just to add something else, but there's a lot of people who want to jump into the bandwagon of climate change now. They're saying, man, I got this fantastic idea. I want to go out there and implement it. And most of the people that come apply to us, they think they're going to make millions. Some people think they're going to think billions. So we bring them back to reality. We said, guys, do you really understand the market? Do you really understand the market analysis? Did you go and speak to people? So before you come with your wonderful idea to think it's so great and so beautiful and it's going to sell like crazy, be realistic. Test the market. And a lot of times you're going to be disappointed. So just be real, guys.
I think this takes us back to that like slow, accelerated growth. You have to go slow first in order to accelerate. When I started the Kilimanjaro project, I thought that people were just going to throw money at me. It's Kilimanjaro, climate change is real, here we go. And they didn't. And I raised a little bit of money to begin with, and I failed on epic proportions, not getting the right tree in the right place, in the right time, with the right communities. And I often reflect back on that, and I'm so thankful that I failed small, and now 4 or 5 years in, we have this like base knowledge. We really know what we're doing. Our work's grounded in science, and now we're ready to scale. So it's like that slow acceleration, and then also you then can prove and validate your point. Are we coming up to time? Sorry, guys. That was a very fast 40 minutes. I didn't even get to the questions.
Now we're going to do a Q&A.
Okay.
Right, so it was split in 2020. So we're going to do a round of questions and answers. We've got about 15 minutes to do that. Well, 10 actually. But yeah, if you have a question, we have roving mics that will be making its way around. I already note 2 hands, one way in the back, one over here, one in the center over here, 3 questions. So what we'll do is, just for the sake of time efficiency, can we start in the back and work our way forward? Great. So if you have to raise your hand now, because if the mic passes the row you're sitting in, it's passed. It's not going back.
Thank you so much. So my question is, I think one of the points that you raised, so I think fintech had a similar sort of phase where, fintech was really big, and then everybody was building the fintech off on top of an actual problem and solution just so that they can get the funding. With climate tech on the continent, how do you think we can ensure that people are actually solving problems? Do you think that the entrepreneurs building are actually equipped or understand the space, and what can be done to ensure that people are building real solutions as opposed to solutions to attract funding?
So basically, if you look at all the thematic areas in South Africa, whether it's agriculture or health or basically water, energy, you would say that we're a land of a lot of problems, but we're also a land of a lot of opportunities, because there's opportunities there to have solutions. So if you may just say, well, let me look at agriculture. Maybe I should look at smart agriculture. Try and think how we're going to help or make things easier for the farmer. Maybe have ideas in terms of solar to get irrigation systems, to get water out of the rivers or something. Think of the problem to find solutions of the problem. Because if you can't find the solution to the problem, don't think airy-fairy you're going to solve the whole world's problem, whole South Africa's problem. Be specific on a problem and have your niche or your targeted area there. Then you would say, okay, fine, now I'm focusing. Because some people, if you focus on a lot of things, you focus on nothing. And people always want to focus on 50 different things, a whole bouquet. And 20 years down the line, the guy is still talking about the same thing. But it's past the problem. So pick one problem and try and solve that problem. And then it doesn't matter where 50 other people are looking at it. You can look at energy. But now you've got a problem with energy, you need a lot of money to have a solar farm. And in terms of solar farms, you can build a solar farm for 5 billion rand, but it's just going to produce you 100 megawatts of energy. So, I mean, the ROI on that is almost ridiculous. So look at simple things. My idea is to look at simple things and find solutions for that.
If I can just add, for us, in terms of the problem area, the problem is definitely there, without having to dig too much into it. There's a drought in Kenya, people are dying. There's floods that were here in South Africa, cyclones in Malawi, Mozambique. So climate change is very real. So how we look at the companies that are coming through to understand if they're the right team or solution offering for the problem. We already know what the problem area is. We look at now how these companies are using technology to solve for some of those problems. Some provide maybe drought-resistant seeds to farmers. Some provide insurance for harvest loss. Some provide solutions for post-harvest storage to avoid loss. Others do cultivate land that was perhaps desert and now is land for cultivation. But further than that, we also then accelerate these individuals through a proper sort of venture building 4 to 6 month program where we can see that you're the right team, you have the right mindset, you have the right intention, but then maybe there's some gaps within your team. Maybe you're tech heavy, but you need someone who's clear on the product market fit, clear on scalability, clear on that particular market you're serving, finance, for example, and then support these businesses to be able to fill in those gaps in their companies, so that at the end of that program, you've gotten funding, you've gotten some business support, and you're at the stage where you have validated what it is you're trying to solve. Because sometimes it is a startup, and they're not trying to make a solution to get funding, but they are looking at an area where they know there's a problem, they want to solve it, they don't know how to solve it, but they have the right mentality, talent, skill, education background, etc. So then we support them to be able to grow and create a viable business. And then you're able to attract now the other investors who come in to take the business to another level.
One thing I'd also add to that, like just from an entrepreneur's perspective, is like, what is your proximity to the problem? Because I think so often we're enabled to be abstracted away from the problem because of like even the tech space. It allows us to operate from a distance. And I love like getting up front and close with whatever problem it is, to almost have a lived experience so that there's a high resolution on what you're dealing with. And I think like I loved your example of speaking to the older folk of an area and like getting to know the people, knowing their stories. It adds that context and resolution to what you're dealing with. And I think like that for me is a critical first step, is like, what is my proximity to the problem I'm dealing with?
Cool.
Yeah, next one.
The mic's moving down.
Yeah.
So anyone else in that area of the room? No? Go.
Thank you so much. Sanbanani, my name is Mpho. I've got a question, particularly with regards to the green business. I know Ms. Lorena also mentioned quite a few things about if you're going to build a business, make sure it's not for the investor, but it's for yourself, right? Now, my biggest problem about the green businesses is that we see a problem, we identify the solution. I'll make an example. I had a problem with reeds in our area, and went on to an incubation. They said, come back with a prototype. When I got there, the reeds were burnt down. So now the problem comes in when government has these 2-second solutions where we can just burn it down, further accelerating climate change issues. But how do we then make your business actually stick? How do I make sure that after the reeds are gone, after the floods are gone, how am I going to use that app into making a difference? Or do I wait for another rainy season, sell it to another company? How can we fill that gap?
Okay, so I think in any business, the first thing you look at whether it's feasible to actually do it, then it's viable. Can you actually, is it reasonable to actually go forward with that project? But what is very important for a business is sustainability. I'm not talking about the ESG sustainability, I'm talking about the business sustainability. Because you're not opening a business to run it for 1 or 2 years. You're opening a business for it to be 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line. So, if you want to be, if you want it to be sustainable, in terms of the REIT example, maybe they burn the grass, but maybe have some other offerings in that bouquet that will sustain you to maybe some other issues, but something to keep your business sustainable. Otherwise, after 2 years, you're going to be disappointed and your app is going to be dead and you're not going to have anything. So always think, if you've got an idea, if you've got a problem, if you're going to solve, would my solution be sustainable into the future? Because 10 years down the line, you want it to be still a business that's going. And that's what happens in South Africa. A lot of people, we think of, we build businesses, after 6 months down the line, if it closes, they try and fail fast, some fail a long time. Or if they get a job, they forget about the idea and they go and they take the job. So if you want to build a sustainable, if you want to build a business that over time, it must be sustainable. So you always test the market to judge your sustainability.
Next question, yeah.
Great.
Have we got
All the way to the front, the microphone has passed.
Ooh. Speak now.
That's a great timekeeping strategy. Go for it.
Thanks. My question isn't very straightforward. I think just like climate change, it's not a very straightforward problem. So just a bit of context, I worked at one of the biggest fashion retailers in the country, trying to help them redesign their sustainability strategy, looking at ESG indices, analytics, reporting, starting with transparency. I got excited, but also quite despondent and despairing at the same time, looking at this and getting behind the scenes. One of the conclusions that I came to, specifically in the B2C space, is that one of the biggest challenges in being sustainable or building regenerative systems, just the human nature of path of least resistance, right? We don't like change, especially if it's going to be harder. So the problem with consumerism, in my opinion, is that a lot of these things are just highly convenient. I can use a trivial example as these new black Woolies bags and how that change was difficult for them to implement just because it's less convenient for customers to remember to bring bags than to get the plastic bags there. I can use, Callum, your example around bicycles, around the fact that it's more convenient and easier and cheaper for me to go to get a taxi than it is for me to learn how to ride a bicycle and then buy one, even though it's better. And it's also going to take me longer to get to my destination. So to open up with all that context, I think the point I'm trying to get to, and you raised great points on a B2B space around how to make things more convenient for farmers, and that's a great way to go there. But in the consumer space, I find that so challenging. And I open here this complex topic because I really want to solve this for myself and I don't have an answer. Is like, how can we make things easier and make sustainability and climate tech sexier for consumers that will motivate them to change in a world that's so driven by things that are overly convenient but not sustainable?
I think you've answered part of your question with the Woolies bags, for example. I think some of these things have to be enforced from a higher level, top coming down. We also had the same thing in Kenya where plastic bags were completely banned. It was illegal to have plastic bags, so then we were forced to use the reusable bags. I think in Ethiopia they have a target of, in 2030, that there'll only be electric vehicles in running in the country. So then it sort of forces consumers to start using solutions that are climate smart. Coming down, I mean, from bottom going up, there's a company here in South Africa that we looked at that's in the carbon accounting space. And they try and make users more aware of the, for example, carbon emissions of buying meat via instead of something else, so that every single day you sort of start having a behavior change where you start mentally being aware of what your own footprint is. It's just that at the moment, climate change is something that is not seen as a big problem here, even though it's a huge problem, because everyone says, oh no, but we have so many problems in Africa. We have malaria, we have HIV, we have extreme poverty. But then a lot of those are also related to climate change, for example, malaria and water bodies. So I think it's more a mindset change that will take a long time, but then over a period of time, from governments enforcing certain changes within the community, and then us being so mentally aware of our own personal footprint. Education system is one that could come in heavily in terms of starting from the very bottom. For my kids, I'm like, littering is like an extreme crime, so that they know, even when someone else litters, they get angry. They're like, how did that guy just throw a bottle out of the car? So that right now it's not going to be an immediate change, but over a period of time, small changes will eventually get us to a point where it's second nature to us. And I think then we'll start seeing changes within the climate space.
Yeah, and I think there's always going to be those forerunners that live lives of sacrifice, that really do have to set something, set a trajectory, and that's difficult. And I think for everyone that's passionate in this particular space, you do have to dig deep, and I think find people that are like-minded, and that creates hope, and that creates like a momentum and a bit of a snowball effect. And there's going to be like large resistance, but change makers, you wouldn't be a change maker if there wasn't that resistance. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do think like I resonate with that sentiment, and I think for myself as well, there are a few things that I really want to see happen differently in the world, but I've realized that requires a life of sacrifice to a certain extent, and also then finding your people.
I think there's a large conversation around values, and how we value and then what we incentivize. We have a product in Tanzania where we pay farmers to grow trees, and they get incentivized every 3 months they go and track their tree, they get money in their mobile money account. So they're financially incentivized to do the right thing. And sometimes that's where you have to start. It's not, it's not all, oh, they must plant trees because it's the right thing to do. Yes, it is, but when you're struggling to feed your family, right? And so I think that sometimes providing financial incentives through tech, through other means, I think is one way to get the people moving in the right direction. And you see that I think it was in the 80s in the US or even the 70s, they had a big campaign on littering, and you got fined $1,000 for littering. And that's what changed the behavior. Yes, there were big campaigns and big signs, but people didn't want that $1,000 fine. And so if we can also somehow incentivize people to do the right thing. And it's not just money incentives, it could also be food incentives, it could be other ways of connecting that can drive that behavior change and start changing the hearts and minds of consumers. Yeah?
Okay.
Do you want to say something?
Always want to say a story, but so when Rudy Giuliani took over mayor of New York, basically the crime on the subways was crazy. There was no way you could go into the subway. So what they said, let's start fining the guys by spitting or throwing bubble gum down. So they started increasing that fine. Slowly, when they started fining guys for not spitting and throwing the bubble gum down, that actually stopped the larger crimes. So we need to somehow find that solution that doing small incremental things eventually leads to bigger things. And I think that's how it's going to start in South Africa, to say, guys, we would not tolerate littering. I didn't say loitering, but littering. So you start small incremental things, and it changes the mindset of a human being. So, that's